Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Silly Girl Carmen. I'm super excited to be sitting here with Danny, who is the creator and founder of an amazing brand called Picnic Wear. I'm really excited to be talking with you today. How are you?
I'm great. I'm really excited to be talking with you too. Thanks
Yeah,
for having me.
no problem. This is the perfect brand. I've been more interested in talking about stuff that's environmentally friendly,
Yeah.
and such a dope, vibrant style for your brand.
Thank
This is
you.
gonna be. I'm excited to hear more about your history with that, and then what
Yeah,
you have to say about the environmental portion as well.
totally.
Before we jump into the interview, can you give us a quick intro into who you are? Introduce yourself.
Yes, totally. So I am Danny. I have worked in the fashion industry for over 10 years. So I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, dreaming of being the next Marc Jacobs or Anna Sui. It was the early 2000s, so those were definitely like my fave brands, designers.
Mhm.
So I moved to New York City for fashion design school. I studied fashion design at FIT. I graduated in the last recession. I found myself in fast fashion. So it wasn't really where I thought I would end up, but I was just so fortunate to have a job at all. That summer was really, really difficult. I think I went on like two interviews in the span of like the 5 months after I graduated.
Hmm.
So being in the fashion industry, as you can imagine, it's very judgmental and superficial. So when you find yourself in a specific area of the industry, it's very difficult to break out of that. So I stayed in the fast fashion industry for the whole 10 years of my career, despite not even shopping fast fashion. So, I mean, I did in the beginning, but as I learned more about the industry from working hands on within it, I realized I didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't want to buy anything from the fast fashion world, but I had a hard time breaking free because I am Canadian. I
Mhm.
was in the US on a visa. So I had to have sponsorship from whatever brands I worked for.
Right.
But in 2017, I got married. Woo! So I got my green card. And basically, by the end of 2018, I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew that I needed to get out of the industry. It was not doing anything for me. I didn't like being a part of what I felt was so damaging to the environment and people. It took, I had a lot of privilege that I was able to do that because I mean, the money I had saved was from working in the fashion industry for so long. So that's what allowed me to be able to break free. So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that background into that world. So, fast forward now, you've broken out of that, and it's awesome
Yes.
that you've started your own brand. When did Picnic Wear start, and what inspired the birth of it? Although, kind of what you mentioned,
Yeah. Yeah,
was.
totally. You've got a little bit of background on that. But so like I said, I left 2018, and then 2019 was kind of a year of self-discovery for me and like major hustling. It was very scary. I definitely, like, as soon as I left my full-time job, I like broke down because I was like,
Mm,
what am I doing? I freelanced a lot. I actually started my own um, design studio. So I purchased an archive of vintage and antique, this is so specific, but
mhm.
knit and sweater references because my experience in the fashion industry was as a knitwear designer. So I
Oh,
purchased this archive and basically sold pieces to different designers and brands as inspiration. But when the pandemic hit, I knew I had to pivot a bit because,
mhm.
the retail sector was hit so hard, and my studio was so young that my 2020, I had this whole plan of like broadening my horizons and
Right.
building up my client base, and so I knew that was going to be hard. And at the same time, like most people, I was just feeling super anxious and like didn't know what to do. And being the person that I am, I just needed to like make something and like
Mhm.
funnel my anxiety into projects. So I had some vintage towels, um, because I'm just a weirdo and I collect weird vintage things. And I have been selling vintage like on Etsy and stuff for years. So I was like, what can I do with this? This is a raw material basically. So for whatever reason, I decided to try and make a hat out of it. Bucket hats were so popular, but I didn't know how to make the brim and I didn't have a printer. So I made my own pattern, and that's how I kind of came up with that flounce brim, which I feel like has become the signature like hat silhouette that I do.
Mhm.
And I just showed it on my personal Instagram, and I got a really good response. And so I had, in reality, really started picnic wear the year before, but I was more doing like tie dye and stuff. But I just kind of at that moment realized like, okay, this is something I can run with. So
Mhm.
I basically just started making things out of towels and vintage textiles. And then I had some rickrack, which is that little squiggly trim.
Mhm.
And I made some cloth masks, as a lot of makers were doing at that time.
Right.
And since then, it's just kind of like snowballed from there. So then I take the remnants from those towels. I've started like appliquing them into sweatshirts, or onto
Mhm.
sweatshirts, I should say. And then the remnants from that, I've been making into little reusable like makeup remover pads.
Hmm.
So I don't use the term zero waste because honestly I don't know how that's possible, but I use the term minimal waste. So it's almost like a creative challenge to figure out what to do with every little last bit that I possibly can.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with it, and the aesthetic of the brand is just who I am. Like I
That's
can't
that's
help it.
very
I've always loved color and
Mhm.
pattern and been super inspired by the 60s and 70s, which I think comes out a lot in what I do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I've just been really lucky that other people have responded to that aesthetic as well.
Yeah, that's awesome that in like a questionable time of like anxiety and like, oh, I need to create, you found that's how a lot of stuff seems to come together. You found like a really cool something for yourself that really is speaks to who you are and is something
Totally.
impactful. That's really awesome.
Thanks.
I love that. I'm definitely a vintage lover, and I don't know. There's a joke that I kind of like everything that's a little grandma-ish, like sweaters, old antique like teacups,
Yes, and
like
like
that.
the whole cottage core thing, like people are
Right.
so getting into that.
So that's awesome. Definitely relatable and very cute stuff you've made. I've definitely been
Thank you.
admiring it on Instagram. So what would you say is the importance of being environmentally conscious in your line of work?
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe you have more insight on kind of the larger impact the fashion world does play on our environment.
Yes. This is a loaded question. I could talk about this for like days. So
Okay.
I will try my best to just kind of like highlight a few things. So
Mhm.
I really can't overstate the importance of thinking about the environment in what I do. The fashion industry has truly done so much damage to people and the planet. It's hard to imagine how we can come back from it. So for me, it's a non-negotiable. The textiles I use are obviously really beautiful, like indisputably beautiful, like towels and printed fabrics. But I'm also trying to introduce more like, like the sweatshirts I use, a lot of them are like graphic sweatshirts of like a sports team from a random like high school or something and applique on top of them. So I like to combine these like beautiful textiles with these, things that are more you could see ending up in the landfill very easily because that's honestly what happens to a lot of this stuff, even what we donate. And in terms of the industry at large, when we think of fast fashion, I think a lot of us still think of like the main, like Forever 21, H&M, Zara, when in reality, sadly, most brands are offering like fast fashion now. So most brands we hear about, the household name brands operate like fast fashion, because the past couple of decades, probably mostly because of the last recession, it's kind of been a race to the bottom for retailers. So who can get the cheapest price? Because what we see from brand to brand, a lot of it is the same. And so when it comes to, what the consumer is going to purchase, a lot of the times it comes down to what's the cheapest. Yeah, sadly. So there's, again, little to no regard for the impacts of getting that cheap price and what impact that will have on the planet and also the people making the clothing. What's really crazy to think of is that clothing today costs 5% less than it did in 1990. So 30 years ago, our clothes were actually more expensive. Our perception as consumers of what things should cost is really, really warped because the industry just wants us to buy more, more, more. Because I don't know how it happened. It's honestly like both from the retailers and the consumers play into this, but like this feeling that like you always have to be buying new things. I think I don't remember the exact statistic. I should have written this one down, but something like the average American buys a new piece of clothing like every 5 days or something crazy like that.
Wow.
Yeah. And the apparel industry accounts for 10% of global carbon emissions. So it generates tons of greenhouse gases due to the energy used for production, manufacturing, transportation. It's crazy. It's like I said, it's hard to imagine coming back from it. But it's also another thing I want to say is in terms of sustainability, this is like something I started thinking of this year in a new way. Like I never really thought about it like this, but it's important to remember, but half of sustainability is about the environment and half of it is about people too. So workers, like when we say the prices are going down, 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 doesn't make sense because of inflation. People should be paid more as time goes on.
Right.
But in reality, the people making these garments are paid pennies for the garments. So a statistic I read recently was that the best case scenario is that 4% of a cost of a garment is what everyone involved in the production of that garment will be paid. So that's 4% split between the person sewing it, the person washing it, the person inspecting it, and not even the people sewing it, because it might be one person who's like marrowing the edges, one person who's sewing it together or something, packing it, shipping it. So think about how much the people making a $20 shirt is getting paid. So there's a lot of information out there. Like I said, I'm like just scratching the surface, and I know that's a lot to stomach, but these are all things that we should be thinking about a little bit, and knowing that our money is as powerful as our vote. So we are telling brands with our dollar what we believe in, really.
Yeah. Well, I know, like you said, there's obviously way more. And I even for myself, it's something I want to do more research into. And I know just as the everyday consumer who's not looking at it from that side, it's like mind blowing to hear it. But a lot of people are just like, oh, I need to go get this outfit to go here. I need to go get this. And it is weird, I guess, in the climate now, like, I understand. I've even been in that place, I'm sure, where it's like trends are changing so fast, stuff you see online, social media. It's like you need a new outfit for everything.
Exactly.
It's like it's not realistic at all. Even just, I don't know, lifestyle wise, it's like it's too much,
Totally. And if you think about it, it's like, what are trends even? Trends
Yeah,
are made up. They
right,
don't mean anything. They're made up to sell more things.
exactly.
So I feel like when you think about it that way, it can kind of be empowering to think like, oh, I can rebel against that. I don't have to
Right.
feed into that,
Yeah,
because who is that benefiting? It's benefiting the people at the very top, that are making the most money from you.
exactly.
Like, screw that person at the top.
Right. Yeah, wow, it's there's a lot that goes into it. And the
Totally.
thing you mentioned about like the 4% payment and all that, I'm like, yeah, like stuff's serious,
It's
but
gross. It's
yeah,
like, ugh.
yeah. Well, I'm glad that you've come out of the fast world and now you're doing something that, will hopefully make a change and get some of this different product moving in different ways.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have or insight would you give creatives or fashion designers that are looking to start out in the fashion world or creating their own brand?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I feel like there's so many different directions you could go. When I graduated, I didn't even think that it was possible to start your own brand unless you were like, you came from money or
Right.
something. Um, and I will say that, like, I do think that experience is really, really important.
Mhm.
Um, and it's I really feel for people graduating right now, perhaps out of fashion school, or just wanting to, wherever they're coming from, wanting to start their own line, because it is really, really challenging, and it's hard to get that experience in the first place. It's hard to get your foot in the door, regardless of whether you have a choice of what door that is.
Mhm.
um but really, I just think that balance is key. So be confident yet humble. So whether you've had experience or not, be confident in what you believe in, but be humble in what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So
Right.
be a sponge and absorb, but then, um, be open minded, but true to yourself.
Mhm.
So listen to different perspectives. Really, that's so vague, but it should be vague, because there's
Mhm.
so many different ways that you could think about that. And um, I think the biggest learning for me is, I mean, it's obvious, work really hard, but knowing when to take breaks, that's the hardest thing,
Mhm.
that I've come to terms with, because it's often in those breaks that you get the most ideas. It's like, if you're
Right.
going, 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 how are you developing new ways of thinking? How are you coming up with new designs, new ideas? Like, you gotta take a minute, relax, and that's when your kind of creativity will flow. Um, and then, but if you do find yourself in the more traditional fashion industry, I think it's just really important to be kind to everyone. It sounds obvious, but when you're on the inside of the fashion industry, it can be tempting to get sucked into the really kind of superficial world that it is. And sadly, what I saw in the industry is that, like, in order to make your way up the ladder, it was kind of, um, in some ways, being not necessarily being nasty, but like, uh, I don't know, telling people what they want to hear, and
Mhm.
feeding into this culture, drinking the Kool-Aid. And sure, maybe that does get you to the top, but do you want to be there if that's what it took
Exactly.
to get you there? Like,
Mhm.
question your values if that is the case.
Mhm.
um but also, like, the industry is really so small, so, like, if you burn bridges, that will come back to haunt you. Like, that's a bridge burned down that might not let you get to this other place somewhere else. It might help you
Mhm.
right now at the job you're at now, but fast forward 3 years from now, you're not at that job anymore, and you need to reach out to people and and try and find something new, like it doesn't benefit you to burn those bridges.
Mhm.
So yeah, the industry is really stuck in its ways. I think it's notoriously, um, that saying, like, or not that saying, but that mindset that, like, this is the way we've always done things. It's
Mhm.
something I heard in the fashion industry all the time. When you try and challenge the way something's done, it's like, well, this is the way we've always done things.
Mhm.
And I think that is why we are where we are with the industry, unfortunately, is
Right.
this refusal to think of things differently and do things differently.
Mhm.
um yeah, so that was a convoluted answer to that
No,
question.
but that's all good stuff. I mean, yeah, I cannot imagine being fresh out of like fashion school or just trying to even put my hands on like, yeah, where to go with that. And I know from a different
Totally.
side because I started modeling at a young age, so I know the fashion world
Mhm.
being in New York, and
Oh my god,
it's
I'm
it's
sure.
intense, and the stuff of like trying to decipher like, do I want to like play into this game when even when it maybe doesn't
Right.
resonate with like morally how I feel, or like it's a confusing world, and it's intense, and like you said, it's very small market, like it's a small world in itself, like very niche, and you know, yeah, you kind of have to go through your process of like, where do I fit into this? What game do I want to play with it? What do I do?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's all, yeah, fair stuff, good insight from your experience to share for sure.
That's why I'm so inspired by what's happening with, like, that's, there's a lot of positive and negatives to social media,
Yeah.
but this, like, movement that's coming out, it's like it is a platform that allows for this new breed of fashion to come
Mhm.
about. And I'm so inspired by that because it's kind of like a refusal to go with the grain of fashion. And, are we all going to end up in Vogue or on a runway? No, but like, this is different. We're creating something new and something that I think is really powerful.
It definitely is exciting to have like you said, social media has both sides where it's like
Yeah,
overwhelming sometimes, but then there's, yeah, a lot of great things that you get to see and people creating their brands, and it's like, wow, this is really
exactly.
awesome. Otherwise
Totally.
I would have never seen this, so that's really cool. We're going to go to our last question.
Yeah.
What is some advice you would give to someone who wants to shop more consciously or build a more sustainable closet?
Yeah, so I think, kind of wrapping things up, like what I've said before a little bit, is buy less and buy better. If you can, live by those words, I think that you could, have a lot of progress in terms of being more sustainable and shopping more consciously. I think really a big thing is destigmatizing wearing the same thing over and over again. I think that that should be more of a sense of pride than a sense of embarrassment, which is what we've often been kind of programmed to believe. I think that a lot of us think of shopping sustainably means spending more money. And honestly, a lot of this is a result of being told this by, like, quote, sustainable brands, who a lot of which are guilty of greenwashing. When in reality, it can be so much more simple than that. I think the biggest thing that I do this, like, quiz on my Instagram, my picnic wear Instagram, all the time,
Mhm.
um, where I ask my followers, what's the most sustainable clothing choice, and it's like a multiple choice, and the answer is, it's the clothing that's already in your closet. It doesn't really matter whether it's all fast fashion or whether it's all vintage or bought from sustainable, eco-friendly, brands or what have you. You've already got those clothes, so wear them. So
Exactly.
that's the number one thing. I often, think about that when I'm tempted to buy something new. I will open my closet and be like, look at how many fucking rad clothes I have
Right.
already. Do I really need something new? Like, I haven't worn this dope top in like forever. So I think that, like, I mean, that's a practice we could all try a little bit more. And then the other thing, the kind of like slogan I live by and have been like pushing on my Instagram is future vintage over future garbage. So buying things that you absolutely adore and you can imagine adoring it still a year from now, 2 years from now. If you rip it, if you get a stain, you love it so much that you'll go the extra mile and you'll figure out how to repair it yourself or take it somewhere to repair it. Because those are the things that, like I said, future vintage, like a lot of the clothing we buy now, it's hard to imagine buying it from a vintage store 20 years from now, because it's hard to imagine it lasting a year from now. So I think that that's something that we could all, consider a little bit. The sad fact, though, is that 60% of clothing is sent to the landfill or incinerated the same year that it's made. So it's like totally crazy. So it's wise to think about your purchases a little bit before you make them. And if that means like, oh shit, but maybe it won't be on sale anymore, well, consider, why is it so important for you to get it on sale? Is it the sale that's driving the purchase, or is it the item itself? But another thing I have to add is that it's a privilege to be able to make a lot of these choices, whether it's about budget or the size of clothes you wear also, because I think I have a statistic here, only 8% of brands offer extended sizing. So that really, for some people, limits the places that they can shop from. But anyways, I think that the end of the story, my last kind of thing that I live by and I like to tell people is progress, not perfection. Because, and this is one that my friend Amanda, she has a podcast called Clothes Horse Podcast. She always says, because I think when we try and push someone to live within really confined means, it's hard to commit to that, and it's easy, like you find yourself giving up if you think you have to be perfect, like anything in life. Like it's hard to achieve perfection. It's impossible. So I think that, if you want to start shopping sustainably, it's baby steps. It's not something that happens overnight.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Definitely, I've learned a lot, and I'm more intrigued now to even learn more and be more conscious of this
Awesome.
of these things. And I wish you a lot of luck with your picnic wear brand.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So everybody can check out her brand at Picnic Wear on Instagram.
Yep.
We will be in touch. We can't wait to see more from you in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Carmen.
Have a good one.
You too.
Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Silly Girl Carmen, and now I am sitting here with Deandra Marissette to talk more about environmentalism. How are you, Deandra?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, I'm really happy this episode came together so beautifully, because after I was talking to Danny at Picnic Wear about fashion and environmentalism, she sent me your profile to check out and dive deeper into the work and conversation on our environment. So I was super happy when I heard back from you about that. And I guess before we kick off the interview part, can you just give us a basic introduction for Wonderful Radio of yourself?
Yeah, no, totally. So like we said, I'm Deandra Marissette. I have a background in fashion. That was what I was spending a lot of time and energy career-wise on for many years when I lived in Manhattan. I was there for maybe almost 5 years. And during that time, I just became really obsessed with all things sustainability. Of course, the beginning of that journey did have a really huge fashion focus, but eventually I just realized that the notion of sustainability is connected to so many different things, including the way that we create and the way that we consume. So yeah, I think that from obviously the experiences of my career, but then just all of the innovation and the conversations happening around sustainability in places like LA, in places like New York, where I had just kind of predominantly spent a lot of my energy watching over in the beginning. Yeah, it just brought me to this really cool place that's led to where I'm at now.
Nice. Perfect. Perfect. So in general, what is intersectional environmentalism? What is that?
Yeah, that's the big question that everyone's asking this year. And I think it's been such a beautiful starting point to a much deeper conversation in the sustainability conversation that a lot of us have been learning about over the past few years. So it's a really beautiful extension. My founder of the company that I helped found this past year, Leah Thomas, she was really inspired by this term intersectionality. So, kind of just breaking it apart from environmentalism for a moment. And intersectionality describes this interconnectedness or this interconnected nature, I guess we could say, of overlapping identities and how that might translate to various forms of discrimination or disadvantage that someone might experience based on those identities. So it's kind of a lens of assessing these overlapping identities that you might carry. And through that, Leah, my co-founder, she was able to apply this lens to her idea of environmentalism by describing intersectional environmentalism as a more inclusive version of environmentalism that truly advocates for people on the planet and what that means to us. And I think what we're starting to grasp that means to our wider community, because people say people on the planet all the time. They're like, protect people on the planet, protect people on the planet. But if we aren't bringing unheard voices from communities that are the most vulnerable based on any given issue, then are we truly advocating for people on the planet? So intersectional environmentalism basically advocates for, hey, if we're looking at this form of environmental degradation, if we're looking at the climate crisis with regards to pollution or whatever thing you're honing in on, are you bringing the most vulnerable voices to the forefront of that conversation? And that's what an intersectional environmentalist point of view would help achieve.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, because even when I was doing my research, I was like, wait, what is this? This is a new word here. What is the next level of something? But then you guys have a great website, and we're going to talk more about your organization where there's a lot of defining what it is and a lot of great resources to help understand it. So it's really cool to see, yeah, going one step further to bring that awareness in a larger topic is definitely, I could see it's important.
No, sure. And I actually think it is like intersectionality. I think that the background behind it is really interesting too. And so it has been a little bit confusing from time to time, especially as people speak to it in a lot of different ways. And I actually just tweeted the other day because I was like, it sounds like there's maybe some room for clarity. And it was like a tweet that I didn't expect to like pop off, but it kind of popped off. And it basically said, I'm trying to like remember exactly what I said, but it was intersectionality or intersectional environmentalism in this context is the lens, but environmental justice is the goal. So that is kind of just to separate the two, because people, I think, were adopting the term in a way that was like, oh, is this competing with environmental justice, or is this like working adjacently to environmental justice? But I think it's important to clarify that like intersectional environmentalism, that is a tool, it's a lens with which to assess. But environmental justice is what we're working towards together. And it's what we've always been working towards. But I think now that we have this new powerful lens that amplifies unheard voices, it just helps us work towards that goal a little bit better. And I'd love to share just some brief background on where intersectionality came from, because I think it's really interesting and it definitely helps to, shed light on why we're adopting it the way we're adopting it today. So the term intersectionality, again, just kind of extrapolating it from environmentalism for a second, it's had quite a journey. It was a term that was inspired by a group called the Combahee River Collective. And this was a Boston-based group of Black feminist lesbians who formed in the 70s to address how they were being left out of both the feminist and the civil rights movements. And so it was through their work that they described how their experiences overlapped and really spoke to different forms of oppression that they were experiencing based on race, class, gender, sexuality. And so because of this, they believed that if Black women were free, particularly within their own experiences, that it would mean that everyone would have to be free because their freedom would combat discrimination based on so many types of identity. And so later on, I think a lot of people maybe this past year have hopefully heard of Kimberly Crenshaw. Their work would later go on to inspire Kimberly Crenshaw, who's an incredible professor at the Law of Columbia University, or professor of law, sorry, at Columbia University and the University of California, Los Angeles, I believe. And she coined the term intersectionality in the late 80s. And these past few decades, what we're learning is that the word intersectionality has been able to be applied to so many important conversations, like with regards to identity, like being an immigrant, being someone with a disability, being somebody who is impacted by all of these overlapping forms of discrimination. So it's through this intersectional analysis that activists and advocates today are learning how to build a much more inclusive movement and amplify those voices that have traditionally gone unheard in various spaces.
Okay, dope. Perfect. Thank you for that background. And I think I did see, and other people can go check this out. You guys had maybe a clip on the website of Kimberly Crenshaw speaking on it.
Yeah, so we'll definitely let folks go and check out that video.
Yeah.
It speak for itself, but it's a really beautiful TED Talk that just sheds a lot of light on a case that Kimberly Crenshaw was on that kind of really further emphasized the need for an intersectional lens. So I recommend that TED Talk.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so that's good information to know. We're breaking it all down so we can understand this. So now can you give us more insight to your organization specifically, i.e., what's it all about in your work, or maybe how was it born? How did it get its start?
Yeah, no, for sure. So back over the summer after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, our founder, Leah, she wanted to apply the term intersectionality to her environmentalism in a way that she had started to see it be applied to feminism. I love hearing her, talk about, because I think it's just such a good example of where environmentalism has been in the past. She talks about how the people that she would go and march alongside to like protect the salmon were like, why do we need to care about Black Lives Matter? And it was like, I'm marching with you for salmon. How are you not going to march with me for Black Lives Matter? So it kind of started like that. And I think that Leah has a ton of experiences, I think, that as we all do, that have kind of gotten us where we are today. But all of those experiences brought her to this place where she was like, okay, what does it mean to apply intersectionality to my environmentalism? So she created this definition. She got in Canva, shout out Canva, not hashtag not sponsored. She got in Canva and just did her thing. She's a wonderful creative, and she just really wanted to encapsulate it in a way that was special for her. And she posted it, and it ended up going viral. And so when we all, her and our co-founders, when we got together, we saw this potential in the virality to really break down what this could mean for the larger environmental movement. And we know we've been in the sustainable conversation as influencers, as professionals, as activists for so many years that we knew we had this incredible community behind us to really help us figure out what this is going to mean. Like, what is this going to mean? How is this conversation going to develop? We had no idea, but we knew we wanted to do it with like our community. So we launched this platform, and it just ended up blowing up beyond like our wildest dreams. I think that we were really shocked when it hit like 50K, 60K, and like 6 months later, and we're over 200,000 followers. And I think that from what I can tell, I think that we're one of the largest like sustainable environmental Instagram accounts that's out there now, which has just been so wild, but I think is less so a testament to us, but more so a testament to how desperately people have felt this conversation has been needed. And so it really is such an honor, and it's like very wild to me that we get to be stewards of that conversation in any way. But yeah, it was a beautiful start. And so today, 6 to 7 months later, it was kind of weird having to like define ourselves publicly, but because people are like, who are you? And we're like, we're still figuring that out. But 6 to 7 months later, we've landed in this really like comfortable, beautiful place where we feel like, okay, like IE is going to be a media and resource hub. Leah's, little Canva post that she created was a beautiful testament, I think, to the power of art and the power of artivism, if you will. And so, yeah, we were founded on this notion that art is really powerful, that language is powerful. And so I think that that's where the media is like component comes in, being like a really pivotal part of how we storytell, but then making sure that we have the people on our team that can help us bring really strategic point of views that highlight intersectionality in different areas to like the resource and data driven component. So we just have those two, like media resource, working together to be like this beautiful little ecosystem so that we can continue creating content that educates and helps our community grow.
Nice. So you were saying, so this all came about 6 to 7 months ago, the start of IE?
Yeah, this was in
Okay, wow.
July. Yeah, so we haven't been around that long, and it's wild that we're at where we're at. But again, I think it's just a reflection of the work that our community, our wider community, has been doing for so long. We just created a space for it to live. Really.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think based on just seeing like how the website was built and just the connection of you guys' social content, I definitely would have thought it was around longer. So that's dope to see, like you said, to see where it's grown and the impact it has. So that means you guys are on the right path, doing something that's needed,
And we're trying.
Good. So what are your thoughts or the facts that you have regarding the fashion industry specifically and its impacts on our environment? What insight do you have based on that in your experience?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think fashion is such a cool conversation because it's one of those worlds that has always been so driven by art and artistry.
Right.
And I think that when you take that a step further, the things that inform art and artistry historically have always been some form of advocacy or activism or preservation of culture. And when you start to like kind of take it back and like peel away, you see so much synergy between, fashion, music, theater, like all of these different forms of art. So that was something that really just captured me at the beginning of my fashion career, if we want to say that. And I think that because I started my sustainable journey, my first like fashion job was working at Kate Spade, and I was on the apparel buying team. And I walked into that job at the same time that I was walking into my sustainable journey. So the idea of assessing sustainability through the lens of people and the planet, and not just the planet, was something I kind of entered with. I never really saw them as mutually exclusive, but I learned very quickly by having conversations with people that the wider conversation that had already developed did hold them separate. Like it was like, oh, we're going to talk about the planet, but we're not going to talk about people because that makes everybody sad. And so, and I was like, but how can you talk about them separately? They're so deeply connected. So just at a high level, some of the things that I started to kind of wrap my head around early on with regards to fashion or just general consumption, retail, right, was ecological damage. So what is the supply chain and like the process of making clothes doing to the planet? So we're using harsh chemical dyes. And if we just focus on that one thing alone, that has huge implications for how it runs off into people's local water systems. So we're poisoning people's water sources. And then when you poison water sources, you're also poisoning soil sources because that water feeds into your local agriculture system. So if you live in an area where there's a ton of garment production happening, your literal source of sustenance, your water and food systems are heavily compromised. So when I would enter conversations and be like, hey, I'm like seeing people make this connection, because people have been doing this work for a long time. The work that we're amplifying on IE, this is like work that has been done. We're just trying to be like, hey, listen, right? And so when I would bring those notions to the forefront of different conversations, people would be like, well, but we just want to talk about the soil. Or like, we just want to talk about the water.
Right.
Okay, but then you're not building solutions. You're not building a conversation that's informed by those most vulnerable, which I feel would be more efficient, but people didn't want to talk about it. So that was kind of one of my first like, oh, okay, like I started to put two and two together that people really didn't like having that conversation. And I think that you can relate that to a lot of things. So that's kind of like a water and soil conversation. We could talk about pollution, right? That's something that we deal with here in the States, like crazy. So we deal with pollution that comes from concentrated areas full of factories or, you know, plastic or like plant facilities. So this leads to a ton of health hazards for nearby communities. And so people want to talk about plastic production or oil and gas and the harm that that has on the turtles, right? They're like the straws.
Right.
But that has horrible implications for the people that have to live life near these chemical plants or these facilities. And that goes for both here and overseas, right? I don't want anybody thinking that we don't deal with those things here in the US, you know.
Right.
So there's that. And then I think that there's also the idea of low wages, which people love to bucket under the people conversation. And I'm like, no. This is a people and planet conversation. One of the examples that we talk about a lot in our work or over the past few years has been the collapse of Rana Plaza, which was a factory in Bangladesh. It was, I believe it was an 8-story factory. And it killed over 1,000 people, like 1,000 plus people died in that collapse. And there were many warning signs that the building was like not okay. And I think that just the garment worker role in general has been one that has been so undervalued. And so what are the implications of low wages on the planet? Well, if people are being paid hella low wages and can't take care of their families, then they're more susceptible to things like child labor, which slows things like educational development because kids are working instead of going to school. And then when you're working yourself ragged just to like barely skate by, then do you have time to understand what's happening to your soil and water systems, to speak up and assess it and analyze it and present how to protect your community? So we're kind of putting people, it's like all connected, and it's really unfortunate that it goes so deep. But I think that the good news is that there are plenty of people on the ground doing this work to understand like, hey, this thing that we're doing, like we need to stop and we need to figure out a solution fast, and we need to do it in a way that's informed by the people suffering most. Like that's where the solutions need to be informed, or what the solutions need to be informed by. And that's what I hope that we can achieve on the platform is really influencing everyone in environmental work to shift the narrative in that way, because that's really been a huge missing link that we've seen in the past. So yeah, people on the planet, not letting people get away with using that phrase unless they're truly being intersectional in their approach.
That's very interesting. Yeah, to hear you even describe that the way you did, yeah, to really, yeah, most people, even myself, when you're thinking about something that is an issue with environmentalism, yeah, you're not thinking about all the intertwined layers of it and what it goes back to, if this person's doing this, if this is happening. So that it's very eye-opening. And I think the average person, if they're not in this industry, for them to be like, wow, yeah, I haven't looked at it that way. I think it's very interesting. When you, because yeah, you said you went in, you were going into the fashion business and industry, but you were also kind of on your sustainability journey. Was that was it hard in a sense of like being conscious, like, no, that's not a good choice, or no, I don't need to go get that, or actually a better way to do this? Or yeah, how did that work for you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. No, I think that when you first dive into sustainability, particularly from a fashion standpoint, because it's so directly tied to like your consumption,
Yeah.
the guilt is real. The guilt is so real. And it's hard to get past, I think, initially. But what I hope that I can bring to the conversation and what people in our community can bring to the conversation is that, okay, you just said it yourself. You're like, whoa, that is so many things to consider. And it's like, okay, why are we building systems where there are all those detrimental things to consider? So at the end of the day, it really isn't the consumer's fault. It is the creator's fault. The consumer can speak up. The consumer can speak up and say, hey, H&M, love your latest collection, but like, why are you dropping a new one next week? Like, is that sustainable? Right. So, so I think that,
That's the weirdest part. It's so everything is so fast, and naturally, the way we're unfortunately programmed in society, it's like, oh yeah, well, yeah, I want that for spring too. I want that for my vacation. Oh, well, that's cute, but it's like, this is kind of ridiculous, and the prices we're paying on it, you have to know. It's like, this doesn't make any sense, really.
right. So I think that what I had to like train my brain to do was rid myself of the guilt and try to make conscious choices myself. Obviously, like I've definitely over the years come to a place where I'm not buying anything that I know I'm not going to love for a long time, right? Like there's that level of ownership over your own consumption that you can take.
Mhm.
But I think that at the end of the day, we as consumers and as creators of other things that do value our own creative process need to be really critical of the creative processes of things that are harming people on the planet. And so I kind of think it's this like dual relationship between the creator and the consumer. And we all serve as both. We are all creators and consumers,
Right.
and we all engage with creation and consumers or with consumption. So I think it's just about giving yourself a little bit of grace. You live in a system that's like really messed up, and that's not your fault. But you can still use your voice to be like, hey, I want the system to be different. I want it to be looked at differently. I want a solution now. And I don't want to hear that a solution's coming later because you need to make a buck.
Right. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah, it's and like you said, and then maybe, working with yourself, having that grace, but then also being conscious, like, well, yeah, I'm gonna make better choices on what I really need and what I really like versus just, being taken by every new awesome thing that I see, I suppose.
Right. I think
Um,
another interesting point on that, and I don't know, maybe I feel like music has gotten to an interesting place with this too. I don't know if you would make this connection, but I think that when fashion becomes so accessible in conjunction with like this idea of always being on trend, I think that it creates this like lack of self-identity. So when we always want to be on trend,
yeah,
we're spending so much time and energy trying to keep up with what's on trend and emulating that and like reflecting that, that
yeah,
we're not even taking a second to really develop our own personal. Of course, you go through like a phase where you're like, I'm figuring it out, right? Which is fine. But eventually, like, you want to feel as though you've developed your own personal identity. And like from a fashion standpoint, I'm like, if I'm constantly trying to keep up with trends
yeah,
and constantly buying new things, then I'm not building a relationship with my wardrobe, my own form of expression in that way.
yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, just being able to take some time to assess whether or not you really need something, it goes beyond your ecological impact, your environmental impact, right? It's also you connecting with yourself more deeply in your own sense of identity and expression too, which is a beautiful art form. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that remembering that in whatever art form you're consuming is really important.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, it's that the good and bad of, I think, also, yeah, our industry, the fashion industry and industries in general move fast as far as the trends and the upkeep, and like a new thing to stimulate us every day, week, month, whatever it is. It seems to get faster and faster in that sense. And social media, it goes hand in hand, is what we're feeding off of every day. It's like, oh, somebody posted this new look, somebody's doing this new trend of this dance and this song. It's like a never ending new consumption of something. So it's like, yeah, when do you take time just to be like, you know what, no, actually today it's not about like me trying to follow up to everything. It's just like, actually, I just want to listen to this song, and actually it feels more natural, and I identify with this outfit. It's like, I think everybody is at a place where they have the choice to be conscious of it, to know when to like separate and just like make a personal choice and find that center for yourself, versus just take more of like all this information in.
100%. And I do that all the time. I always have like a few pieces in my wardrobe that I'll, when you go back to it, you're like, "Ah," like it just feels like you.
Yeah.
Or like when you re-listen to a song over and over again because it just takes you to like this really nice place that you connect with so deeply. If
Mhm.
you're constantly consuming new things,
Yeah.
you never get to like revisit and identify that that's a place you like to be.
Right.
I think that's
Yeah.
important to know.
Yeah. And that's something I sometimes I think about when I was a kid. It was almost more enjoyable, and of course it just is a nostalgia, where it was just like, yeah, I either had CDs here in the house, or I had to go get a CD. Like the amount of content is almost, it's great that so many people maybe pertaining to music have the platform to put stuff out and like expand out to the world, but it's almost like an overwhelming inflow of like, there's so much to choose. Like, sometimes I'm like, I can't even just pick a song to listen to. Sometimes it was like nice to have that simpler, like, this is what I found, this gem, and that's it. There's not a million things that I'm looking for, around that. But hey, everything advances, so it comes with the good and the bad, and we gotta balance it out.
Yeah.
So I did get a chance to look around your site, and I'm encouraging everybody to go check that out. It's definitely awesome to see all the information and resources that you guys have put together. There was definitely a lot to like look through and learn from. At this current time, what is a topic or project that you're most focused on in the organization?
Ooh.
Or maybe it doesn't work that way. Maybe it's all things at once and it's ongoing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that one of the things I'm really focused on right now, outside of kind of the behind the scenes of like, how do we pay taxes, right? Kind of that operational stuff.
Okay.
Aside from that, I think that what I really love that's happening right now is that people are really getting behind the notion of amplification, because we're like, amplify unheard voices, amplify unheard voices. But I think that there is a carelessness to be cautious of with regards to that. So, there are plenty of stories that go untold or under amplified. And I think that when you're trying to find a solution, or when you're trying to uncover something that's really important, if you don't take great care with that amplification, you could still just be creating noise. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can still just be adding noise. So I think that because, like I mentioned before, we want to be this media and resource hub that works with a lot of synergy to create the content that we create, it's important to me to really grasp with my team and my community what it means to use that intersectional environmentalist lens to critically assess what needs to be brought to the forefront. Because amplification and sharing stories just for the sake of connection is such a beautiful thing. But if that's the content, then that's the content. But if the content is finding a solution, then yeah, we do need people sometimes with certain levels of expertise to come in and say, this is the missing link that needs to be amplified. So I'm not about to contribute to a platform where that's the goal and we're just filling it with stories for the sake of, right? So I think just holding a great deal of responsibility with like the way that we amplify and the care that we take in that is something that I'm focused on right now, because we are still just like such a baby little organization, and we've grown so big. And I think that I'm just like really starting to make sure I feel good about the way we're stewarding the conversation.
Well, thank you, Deandra, so much for coming on Wonderful Radio. I'm definitely going to attach your social media and the organization's website and social media so more people can definitely check it out and get informed. And we hope to be in touch and look forward to see how you guys expand more in your work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one, girl.
Ready, you too.